Here we are, board fans. This is the Jeff Mccalum Arc Egg. So I'm going to take you through the board, its design features, and hopefully give you a much better idea of what it's about and whether it might be a board that is worth considering for you and your surfing. Different face from the normal one, largely because you're very rarely likely to find Luke Hart surfing one of these, whereas you're probably likely to find me surfing one of these every other day, basically. I love this kind of small, slightly alternative, grovelly, nuggy kind of board, largely because they're a lot of fun and they go brilliant in UK conditions, especially if you're not a shortboarder wannabe, basically. Looking at nobody. So, what have we got here? This is the Jeff Mccalum Arc Egg. It had pretenses of being an egg once, but now is much shorter and has an arc tail, which is where the name comes from. It's basically his ode to getting as much volume into a board as possible, and he really fulfills that brief. In terms of where it kind of sits in the market and what it's for, it's that kind of the love child of a mini Simmons and a fish. And whilst you might immediately think, oh, this is definitely a small wave board, and that is absolutely where it excels. It's got a number of features about it, which means that it not only thrives in the small stuff, but actually, if you've got the paddle power and the balls, you can take it out in some much more serious surf as well. So I'm going to take you through the board, its design features, and hopefully give you a much better idea of what it's about and whether it might be a board that is worth considering for you and your surfing. First of all, the outline. I've just been showing you the outline. The outline, if any board should be called a bullet, this should be it. You look at that shape. It's short, it's wide, it's got the pointy nose at the front, and it's got the big, broad tail at the end. If you looked at the front half, it's really all fish, basically. It's classic beak nose, but that sort of wide under the chest area. All the volume here, right under your chest, into a pulled in point, then really kind of straight and parallel through the middle. You can kind of see how much of the board is dedicated to that parallelity, which gives you so much natural down the line speed and trim. And then at the end, it pulls in gradually into this really broad arc tail. Now I'd say this is almost like mini Simmons levels of kind of like width and broadness. It's maybe a little bit more pulled in than a true mini Simmons, but that tail is going to give you so much lift, so much speed, and that's effectively what you've got. You've got the kind of a slightly pulled in mini Simmons, and you've got all fish up front, basically. What it kind of does is it loosens off that fish template. If you imagine you had a fish tail cut in here, what you'd end up with is a tail that sits far more deeply in the water with a lot more kind of rail in that fish V. And that's going to give you control and all the qualities that we love about a fish. So by filling that in, we're effectively giving the tail a lot more lift, a lot more volume, more speed, and a slightly looser, freer feeling. So whereas you might surf a fish short, like 5'3", 5'4", you can actually surf this a little bit longer thanks to that slightly broader, looser tail. It means the board isn't as tracky as the silhouette might suggest. So along with the outline, let's have a look at the rocker. Quite an interesting rocker. At first glance, the way it sits, you might think it's actually really flat. And that's largely because the nose is relatively low in terms of rocker. But actually, as the tail, it's got a bit of flick on the tail. So it's a bit more tail rockered than it is nose rockered. And what that gives you is loads of speed and easy planing up at the front of the board. And when you combine that with that width as well as the volume you've got there under the chest, you can see how the board is really trying to maximize the amount of speed and weight and momentum you're generating in the front half. So even at surf short, you can see how easy and how well that's going to paddle and how easy that's going to catch into waves. And then off the back, the rocker increases as you get towards the tail. Down the line, driving speed, stand in a relatively neutral position. But as you get more and more off the tail, that rocker really starts to kick in when you get it on rail and can turn this into a really high-performing little thing. So you've got that kind of like slight kick in the tail in the rocker, the bullety outline, the fishy nose. In terms of bottom shape, it's very subtle but very elegant at the same time. You've got a really nice kind of rolled V-entry, which just means that even though you've got that low nose rocker, even if you're coming in or if you're cutting back into the wave and dropping in at a relatively steep angle, or you've got a slightly later takeoff, it gives it a bit more forgiving. You're not going to bog it so much that V is going to carry the nose up and away from bogging. You've then got a very subtle concave that starts to appear about 3/4 up the board here, and that concave, single concave, pretty much carries throughout the entire length of the board until it's flat off the end there basically. And that concave is going to give you lift and speed, again, which is what this board is all about. The interesting thing about this bottom concave, and it's impossible to really show, we might be able to get some photos of it and give you an idea, is the width of the rail. It's actually flat off the rail by about 2 or 3 inches. So the concave starts about 2 or 3 inches in basically. So it's flat and then it dips into a concave. So the concave doesn't go all the way to the edge of the rail like it might do in sort of like normal boards that you'd see. And what that gives you is maximum speed in terms of the water coming, laying flat and then releasing off the edge. It also allows in this much wider board for you to go from rail to rail that much easier. Well, if you had single concave from rail end to rail end, that's a huge amount of air you're having to overcome and break the rail from going one to the next. But actually, because you've got these thicker rails, you're releasing much earlier on in the board's width, which again, just makes you allowed to go from rail to rail much easier. So it's surfing much smaller than the width might imply. Then you've got the deck line, which, as you can probably see, it's a really sudden step down deck, which means that the deck line is incredibly flat here. And when you combine that with the flatness on the bottom around the rail that I've already just mentioned, it creates a really stable, smooth surfing surfboard. And it packs, again, a huge amount of volume into it. It's carrying the volume all the way around to the edge before it then suddenly drops in. In terms of the foil, try and give you as good an idea as possible. It's all up at the front. So much volume up the front. In fact, I don't think I've seen a board as foiled out as much front nose bias. Well, we certainly don't do one which packs up so much volume under here and then actually kind of foils it out pretty much at the tail. And this does 2 things. Again, it gives you that easy wave entry. If you're thinking the more weight you've got in the front of the board, as the wave comes, the more weight you've already got wanting to travel down the front of the face of the wave. And this does it perhaps more than any other board. That just gives you an idea. Even though it's a shorter rail length board, whatever, surfing it short, it's going to paddle and catch waves like a much, much bigger board thanks to that. But the problem with lots of foam is that sometimes the rail can get too fat, which means that as the waves get a bit more steep or you're trying to push off a little bit harder, the rail can tend to like bump out a bit. And that's where you start to see the sense of the more fold out rear end basically. So as the foam's coming off the back end basically, what you're actually doing is you're reducing the profile, reducing the amount of foam in the rail, which is allowing you to get a lot more purchase into the wave from about this far back of the board basically. So even though it's got all the foam up front and a lot of foam in the board in general, even though it's got that really fast and loose rear end tail, the board can still hold a line in bigger, more powerful stuff because you get that purchase in the wave thanks to it being so foiled out. This is the feature that I kind of like. I like it. A lot of the boards I surf have this feature. There's something about it that I really like the feel of. And that is running a rail edge much further up the board than you would perhaps in your normal kind of like normal shortboard or daily boards. In fact, I think there's only one really, Morris Cole's probably the only person that shapes a shortboard which carries rail the full length. But just feeling the edge here, even though the edge is kind of gone halfway, it's still a really boxy under bottom basically. The edge is kind of starting to kick in. So it's almost half the board is your running rail edge. And where you've got edge, you've got, again, water release. So with that nice flat rail bottom there, the water is just coming off, it hits that edge and it releases, which gives, again, that speed and trim. And I also read something really interesting, that where you've got edge that goes into variable concave, the water can release in different angles and it can create turbulence off the edge. But if you've got edge and a constant angle of release, so in this case it's almost 90 degrees because this is flat coming up to the edge, rail edge, it's a really smooth release which just aids that even release without turbulence, increasing the speed. And that is mini Simmons science basically, and you can see how it's been employed on the bottom of here. So not only does that edge give you quick release and really aid that sense of trim and momentum that the board has, it also gives you purchase in the wave. So if you're on a steeper face, you bury that rail and it's going to give you some edge. It'll be able to catch the wave and you're not going to jump out even though you've got a much thicker rail than you perhaps normally would. Likewise, if you're coming off the bottom and you're pushing hard, that rail is going to give you a real sense of security, basically. You're going to be able to push hard, and it's not going to feel like it's going to jump out. So again, some real kind of like performance elements in a board that you might think was kind of like, okay, it's just for about sort of easy trimming and sort of weak waves, but no. This can be pushed hard and it can be surfed in some pretty kind of like more critical kind of like positions and waves. The fins, which I've already alluded to, you've got the quad set up there basically. You could surf this as a twin with a nice rake back kind of like keel through here. It'd be a little further up, but actually I think a slightly kind of further positioned keel up on the rail there would kind of allow your foot to sit well over the back of it, get loads of pivot off it. I'd probably surf this as a hybrid keel if I wanted like maximum speed and release, or a split keel kind of like quad fin where you've got more rake in the front fin and then a more upright back fin to give you kind of like speed and release. And then Mccalum does his own quad set, which is a relatively upright sort of like quad set, which is going to give you plenty of hold but plenty of release. I love my fins. I love playing with my fins, and it's the kind of board that I look at and go, oof, I could play with some fins on you, which sounds a bit kinky, but Joe is getting excited. So in terms of waves to surf it in, I think, first and foremost, anything up to kind of like chest high and mushy, this is going to be so much fun. I think when you've got fat waves, a board that just gets ahead of every section just through its own kind of like natural speed and momentum is a godsend. You can just get to your feet and just let it run basically. And put your weight on that and pull off the tail. Like I reckon it's going to turn really nice and tightly as well. So fat, mushy kind of groveller style waves. That bit of concave means you could even give it a bit of a stomp and you're going to get a bit of squirt off it just to kind of get ahead of things. But that's where it's going to kind of like feel most at home. As with our beach breaks, it's quite often you'll have a fat wave for like half an hour and then it might hit a bang. It might start walling up and okay, now you're dealing with a very different type of wave. And again, I'd have no problem surfing this in a kind of like sucky little beach break, take off at an angle, just get the rail on and just try and run as fast as you can before it kind of takes you out. I'd even, and there's every chance I'm going to be getting one of these for myself just so I can prove this. Like if my paddle fitness continues to improve, I'd love to take this into something like 5.3 or 5.4 and surf it in head over. Not go like full Rheinberg squidfish, but, but like I said, it's got all the kind of qualities to be able to surf, like, surf it small so you haven't got too much volume and surf it in some bigger stuff. And I think it would just be so much fun. So that's definitely the plan there. So ideal wave, anything up to kind of like chest high, mushy, ideally, but absolutely comfortable with a bit of shape into it. And then for those kind of like with a bit more paddle fitness, a bit more experience, yeah, see how big you can go on it. I reckon it could hold some pretty good size. Who's the board for? Well, this is an interesting one because I think people are going to look at this and see different opportunities within it. I think if you're a kind of like lower beginner and you want maximum foam, and that's what this board does, it's kind of along the lines of sort of like, something like the Sweet Potato 2 or the CI Ultra Joe, where you're trying to get as much volume into the board as possible, and people see that and go, oh, there's a lot of volume in that board. I'm going to surf it a little bit bigger because that's going to give me loads of wave catching capabilities. Whereas some of those boards, because they have like extreme concaves in them or extreme hip in them, as you scale them up, they don't necessarily work as well as they should do, or as well as you think they might do, because they're designed to be surfed at a certain size for the rider. This one, on the other hand, it has no extreme concave. Yes, it's going to do its best surfed off the back, but actually it's still going to be a lot of fun surfing it through the middle. So if you are somebody that's like lower intermediate and you just want volume and easy wave catching and something you get to your feet and have a blast, go for it. And we've sold these boards to guys and gals that are like 5'7", 5'8", and they're surfing a 6'1" of this, which is nearly like 23 inches wide. It's like got sort of 46, 47 litres volume. So a huge amount of board, and we've had glowing reviews that they're catching loads of waves, they're going super fast and they're having a really fun time. So yeah, if you want something that's just really easy wave catching and you're not too fussed about the finer, keeping it in the pocket, surfing it vertically, size whatever, you just want to catch loads of wave, yeah, it can do that, absolutely. Likewise, if you want to surf it more as a kind of like daily driver, so something that is, surf it your own height or an inch or two under, it's still going to work. You could, like I said, catch again loads of waves on it, and it's going to give you that kind of next level of performance and adjustment and maneuverability. So maybe if you're mid-intermediate and you want something a bit different as your daily driver, go brilliantly in small waves, but like I said, as your ability increases, being able to take out in bigger stuff, surf it like, 4 or 5 inches. I'm probably bang middle intermediate, and I'm kind of thinking about a 5'3" or a 5'5" in this, and I'm about 5'10". So I'm kind of looking at a fish, but with a bit more speed and a bit more looseness off the back there, basically. Literally, depending on how you size it, a full range of people can surf it and really have a good time in it. Where does it sit in the market? I've already kind of alluded to it's a bit fishy, it's a bit mini Simmons, it's a bit Uber Groveller basically. But in the way that Mccalum does, he's kind of created something which there isn't really anything else out like there. And yet when you look at it, you think, oh, I kind of know this board, but actually, it's pretty original and unique. In that respect, it is pretty original, but I think first and foremost, it would be that kind of like Uber Groveller kind of category. But then also like kind of just the easiest wave catching board, but with a shorter rail length basically. So you're kind of easy catching daily driver type thing. Construction. I mean, this wave is built for trim and speed. So I think you got to start with PU. PU just has that kind of dampening, weighty, kind of like soft riding vibe that just lends itself beautifully to this kind of board. Personally, whenever I go PU, I always get an epoxy glass job. I hate the little cracks you get in kind of polyester resin, even though they're totally harmless. There's something about it that my OCD kind of kicks in. But whether you go like with a slightly heavier polyester glass or a slightly heavier epoxy glass, PU is definitely the place to start. If I was going epoxy, and you definitely could surface epoxy, I would go, not epoxy, EPS. I would go for one of the kind of like heavier EPS glass jobs. So like something like our Cloudtech or maybe the Flax Tech, where you're getting a bit of weight and a bit of dampening. I think if you went like pure lightweight EPS, the amount of foam you've got in this, it's going to feel really boaty. And I think every wave that hits the bottom, you're going to hear the noise like kind of boom around like a kind of echoey sort of hole, which is going to give it like a sort of, not just a corky feeling, but a corky sound. So heavier EPS, but I think first and foremost, go PU all the way. How to order? I mean, so this one is going to our friends at Mango in Plymouth. So if you want to go and actually get a hold and a feel of it, they're a good place to start. We've also got them in Unsung Hero in the south of Wales. But if you want your own custom job, and these boards are all about getting your own kind of like resin tint, your own finish, order direct. You can go to our website and go to the custom board builder, look at the keg and have a look through the dims and the options you've got there. Likewise, just give us a call. We love talking about these boards and we can work out which one, what size, what make, how you want it to look is going to be right for you. Like, comment, and subscribe. Yeah, that feels like I've rambled quite a bit. That was my first review. I did, for most of it, have Luke there, just sat there watching me like that, so that was quite intimidating. But I think I'm going to pass, especially, like I said, he's probably never going to surf one of these, so here we go. I've enjoyed it. Hope you have too. Cheers.